A lattice of roiling violet gas filled Mara Elcor's canopy as the bomber's systems dimmed to stealth mode. She felt the hull tighten into silence, countergravs sighing to their lowest whisper, while active scanners died like snuffed candles. Around her, the nebula's writhing tendrils folded in on themselves, making it impossible to tell where void ended and dust began. It was called the Void Maze for good reason. Without a guiding beacon, most ships were lost within hours, driven mad by false echoes and labyrinthine magnetic eddies. Mara had spent the last 3 months learning the currents, threading her way through invisible corridors of dark matter until they felt like the back alleys of her childhood district on Luna. Tonight, those alleys would decide whether hundreds of Terran refugees made it to the Arkhaven or became nothing more than ash on alien sensor logs. The cockpit's ambient lights pulsed faint orange. "Targets nearing Locus," whispered Nyx, the onboard warfare AI, its voice tuned to frequencies that never escaped the bomber's black glass. Mara checked her chronometer. 31 minutes before the Mirian patrol convoy emerged from the deeper swirl opposite the Roche singularity. The convoy's flagship, the dreadnought Apex Shatter, was bristling with point-dense batteries and enough sensor arrays to map a solar system. In open space, the stealth bombers would have been spotted long before they could close for a strike. But here, inside the maze, even the Apex Shatter's arrays would be drunk on Magnetic's easy prey if the Terrans timed their ambush down to the picosecond. Her squadron, callsign Whisperwing, formed a loose delta around her, a formation visible only on tight beam entanglement signals that flicked across her retinal HUD like faint dust motes. Lieutenant Rafe Idris rode her starboard, while Keto Vallo and Von J ghosted portside. Their 4 bombers carried no traditional warheads. Instead, the payload nestled beneath each wing assembly was a pressurized canister of genetically coded pheromone compound and a swarm of inert Nano Leeches, microfrozen to preserve hunger. The leeches measured no larger than skin cells, but once awakened, they latched onto alloys and ceramics with diamond-tipped maws, drilling into power conduits and data buses, drinking energy until systems collapsed in avalanches of cascading failures. Terran engineers had named them piranha dust. Mara preferred the older spacer nickname, Infinity Itch. She flexed her gloved fingers, feeling the cold bite of adrenaline under the suit's thermal lining. "Whisper lead to pack, confirm safety's green," she murmured. Clicks answered back. 3 curt acknowledgments. Somewhere beyond the nebula wall, the Arkhaven freighters waited to punch through, while the patrol was distracted. If Mara's squad bungled the strike, the convoy would reroute, doubling back along the hyperlane and right into the refugees' escape vector. One mistake meant thousands dead. Nyx overlaid a ghostly silhouette of the Apex Shatter onto the swirling dark. 2.5 kilometers long, hull coated in phase-shift armor plates that confused munition guidance. Nano Leeches didn't care about guidance. They simply needed to be delivered. Just a tactic. In the Void Maze Nebula, Terran stealth bombers paint targets with pheromone clouds that lure relentless Nano Leeches onto enemy hulls. It was brilliant, cheap, and deniable. Hard for the Mirians to prove sabotage when half their exposed surfaces disintegrated in a matter of hours without a shot fired. "Convoy translation flare detected," Nyx announced. Mara watched spectral lines bloom on her HUD. 6 escort frigates, 2 storeships, a carrier pod, and the big one. They phased in like stars igniting, their distortion wakes shimmering. Immediately, the maze began to play its tricks. Low-frequency gravity waves tugged at the convoy, scattering them across a 500-kilometer spread. Perfect, Mara thought. Distance eroded overlapping sensors. She nudged thrusters, surfing a pale ribbon of ionized gas, and set the autopilot to pivot around a hidden eddy. The first phase of the attack required perfect geometry. Bombers needed to arc above the convoy, release pheromone clouds, then drop into the lee of a nearby dust lane before escorts could lock on. Too fast, and the leeches would never catch the hulls. Too slow, and point defense would swat them like fireflies. Static hissed. Then Rafe's voice. "Lead! Bandit 4 scanning sporadically." He meant escort frigate 4. They might catch a ghost. Hold vector, Mara replied, forcing calm. Maze's turbulence will spoof them. Time shredded into seconds. She could almost taste the pheromone agent, a manufactured replica of an electromagnetic scent the Nano Leeches had been programmed to crave. Scientists joked it smelled like burnt cinnamon and ozone. Mara prayed she would never find out. She glanced at the release panel. Green across the board. Nix ran a subroutine, calculating relative velocities for each bomber. Numbers scrolled. Optimal drop in 8, 7, 6. She depressed the arming switch. Beneath her seat, the canister de-iced, flooding warm glycol across the microleeches. Billions stirred from torpor, woken by fractal light and the hypnotic pull of pheromone molecules swirling in suspension. 3, 2, mark. A tremor shivered through the fuselage. 4 translucent clouds burst from the bomber's belly ports, blooming outward like ghostly chrysanthemums. The void maze winds caught them, unfurling delicate arms that curled toward the convoy. The material was invisible to standard optics. Only the bomber's encrypted LiDAR tagged the drifting haze in soft gold. Valo! J! Break and slip! Engines responded in silent crescendo. The bombers diving into a canyon of dark matter turbulence. Mara's inertial dampeners groaned. Pressure squeezed her chest as 7Gs tried to compact bones into paste. Then sudden relief, in equilibrium, as they settled behind a dense wall of nebula dust. The apex shatter silhouette loomed beyond, its hull now speckled with tiny returns leeches beginning their inexorable migration. Latch confirmation, she asked. 84% are tracking primary hull, life support conduits, and starboard railguns, Nix answered. Projected critical damage within 16 minutes. Rafe whistled over comms. That's going to itch. But the maze was fickle. A turbulence burst ripped open a transparency in the dust curtain, revealing the bomber's heat signatures for a heartbeat. Alert icons flared red on Mara's HUD. Escort Frigate 3 had pinged them. Idris, cutters inbound, she shouted. Coils of emerald beam fire lanced toward their hiding crease. Mara rolled hard left, thrusters sputtering as power diverted to vector dampening. Ion dust exploded behind her, painting bright scars across sensor wavelengths. She felt a slug of fear ripple through her gut. One direct hit and the bomber's stealth field would evaporate like dew. Nex, eject decoys! Miniature drones peeled away. Broadcasting false telemetry, each coded to mimic the pheromone signature, Frigate. Targeting suites swiveled, confused by simultaneous spikes. Mara seized the moment, pitching downward into a polar spiral. Her helmet crashed against the seat harness as gravity rebelled. Outside, the maze's purple folds blazed white from stray energy. She risked a glance. Rafe's bomber clipped a plasma stitch shield. Aurora's danced. But he kept rolling. Suddenly, the dreadnought's hull glittered, not from weapons but from leeches gnawing into ablative tiles. Tiny twinkles cascaded along plating seams like a shifting star field. She could imagine the chaos inside. Alarms, engineers scrambling to trace voltage drops, system relays shorting in chain reactions. We've stirred the hornet nest, Jace said, voice quivering with exhilaration. Frigate 2, spinning up gravity harpoons. Distance to egress corridor? Mar asked. 2-5 clicks to safe warp, Nix replied. But Frigate 2 blocks intercept path. Standard doctrine warns stealth bombers never to dogfight. They were cloaked knives, not broadswords. Yet retreating would draw the frigate straight toward refugee freighters still hidden in hyperspace shadow. Mara's orders were clear. Neutralize all pursuit before exiting. She toggled to secondary loadout schematic. Each bomber carried a microscopic reserve of leeches, barely enough for a fifth of a frigate's hull. But there was another option. Overload the pheromone spray into a concentrated beam, slapping a single square meter patch with maximal lure. Leeches would swarm any surface with that density, chewing a hole through plating in seconds. The risk? The bomber would have to close to under 500 meters, knife fight range. Whisperwing, form on me, she ordered. "We're tagging Frigate 2 up close." "Never figured you for suicidal lead," Rafe muttered, but his transponder arrow drifted to her 3 o'clock. The bombers executed a loop, thrusters muffled to stealth quiet again. They navigated through eddies of heated plasma and shards of sloughing dreadnought armor. Every few seconds, a panel peeled off, apex shatter, propelled by venting gases, proof that the infinity itch had burrowed deep. Frigate 2 Storm Law appeared, a needle-nosed predator cannibalizing light. Its sensor masts swept arcs like searchlights, failing to lock the barely reflective bombers. Mara counted heartbeats. 500 meters, 480, 450. She thumbed the beam trigger. A narrow column of pheromone compound erupted from the bomber's dorsal nozzle, ionizing as it streaked forward. It splattered across Stormlaw's bow in a milky sheen, invisible to enemy optics. Nix chimed. Saturation 89%. An instant later, Rafe and Jalos their micro-leeches. They spooled out like black glitter, drawn magnetically to the pheromone beacon. No point defense could register something so small, so fast. Within 3 seconds, the beam arrays on Stormlaw's prow flickered. Then an entire wedge of ceramic armor collapsed inward, exposing raw, thrumming power feeds. The frigate convulsed. Mara saw electrical arcs dance like sea serpents across skeletal frames. "Pull up!" she barked. Whining thrusters throttled to max as Stormlaw's spinal railgun coughed a reflex shot. A tungsten rod flashed by Mara's cockpit, missing by 30 meters and shearing a lump of nebula dust instead. The frigate shuddered, nose venting azure plasma. Engines flared irregularly, then died. "Target disabled," Nix confirmed. Adrenaline burned sour on Mara's tongue. "Plot warp." A new alarm screeched. "Multiple micro-jumps detected. Mirian reserve wing inbound." Nix displayed 3 more blips. Escort corvettes materializing at the maze's periphery, far enough to stabilize navigation but close enough to intercept the fleeing bombers. Mara's mind raced. Reserve wing would easily outnumber them once their stealth signature was fried by residual exhaust. They had maybe 2 minutes before scanners pierced the maze veil and their leech stores were exhausted. Unless... She stared at the apex shatter, still hemorrhaging energy. The dreadnought's reactor vents vented radioactive blood. If they could coerce the boat's detonation, the resulting EMP storm would blind any ship within 20,000 kilometers, friend or foe. Nix, theoretical. What's the self-destruct threshold of a Mirian Phase 6 reactor once internal coolant channels are compromised? Nix processed. Without coolant, fusion cycle overrun in 2, maybe 3 minutes. Catastrophic containment failure likely. Do we have a vector to the primary coolant ring? Affirmative. Section 72 midline. However, we have 0 armaments remaining capable of breaching hull deeper than 30 centimeters. Mara chuckled grimly. "We don't need to breach. We just need to accelerate existing damage." She opened squad comms. "Whisper Wing, new plan. We're hitching a ride on the dreadnought." Silence. Then Keto's incredulous laugh. "Tell me you're kidding." "We tag along its hull, run full thrust across weakened segments. Our wake pressure should fracture panels already eaten by leeches, exposing more coolant lines. Get enough venting, reactor goes. EMP buys the Haven freighters a clean run." Rafe cleared his throat. "And us?" "We outrun the blast. Bomber frames are built for sprint warps. We can punch free if we time ignition." She paused, letting gravity of gamble sink in. "Volunteers only. 3 affirmations." Arrived without hesitation. They all knew the stakes. The 4 bombers angled toward the dreadnought. Closer now, Mara saw vast trenches gnawed by leeches like termites, ravaging an iron cathedral. Swirls of coolant mist leaked, glittering under magnetics as neon arcs curled along exposed superconductor rails. Mara lined up parallel to a scarred seam. Running start. 3, 2, 1. Engines howled in unison. Stealth was abandoned. Raw power thundered into the nebula, shockwaves rippling back in violet halos. The bombers skimmed mere meters above the shredded plating, their exhausts slamming into edges of half-eaten metal. Screeches echoed through hull contact microphones as plates buckled, tearing free to reveal a tangle of cryotubes and swirling fusion plasma. Mara's flight path blurred with turbulence. She wrestled the stick, feeling microdebris ping the undersides like hail. Suddenly, a chunk of armor spanged against her starboard stabilizer. Alarms wailed as she compensated, servo motors grinding. But the fracture widened beyond, belching green coolant in a feral geyser. She cheered. Nix, reactor status? Containment trending redline, estimate 1 minute breach. Copy. Wing, peel off on my mark. We slingshot around the stern, then warp. Corvette blips surged nearer, but sensor brightness faltered, already feeling interference from the dreadnought's dying heart. Mara angled nose upward, trusting inertial nav alone. External views became whitewashed by radiation static. Heart pounded against ribcage. Mark! She barked. Bombers burst away from the dreadnought, G-forces crushing them into seats. Mara glimpsed Quito's craft flipping into spin, bleeding flame from a damaged thruster. Valo, vector align, damn it! I'm losing stabilizer, he croaked through static. The dreadnought behind them erupted. Not a neat explosion, but a sunbright bloom, followed by concentric rings of electromagnetic fury. Power spikes hammered Bomber 7's avionics. Mara watched her HUD flicker, then reboot on backup batteries. In that momentary blackout, distance and orientation vanished. She clenched muscles, willing G-suit not to fail. Systems returned with a flicker. Quito's bomber at silhouette now twisting spewed propellant, but regained minimal control. EMP arcs danced across their own hulls. Rafe's voice crackled. Valo is limping but alive. Jay, covering him. Copy. All units prime warp. Nix, calculate jump coordinates for safe corridor 319 Gamma away from refugee vector. Nix responded, albeit sluggish. Subspace integrity, compromised by magnetic surge. Calculating alternative, done. Solution secured. Mara sucked a breath, feeling exhaustion seep in. On my count, 3, 2, 1. The bomber elongated into star lines. Space cracked around its prow. Then came the familiar gut pull. They streak free of the maze, leaving that nightmarish puzzle to stitch itself again behind them. When real space snapped back, Mara found herself adrift in the velvet hush between stars. Telemetry indicated 50,000 kilometers from Arkhaven's rendezvous beacon. Moments later, the others popped into existence. Quito's bomber fluttering but intact, small arcs still skittering along its hull. Relief washed through Mara, limbs trembling. She opened a broad beam coded to the freighters. Haven Convoy, this is Terran Flight Whisper Wing. Route is clear, proceed to Vector Delta. And hurry, Murian reinforcements will be blind for only 20 minutes. Static, then a gruff voice flooded channel. Whisper Wing, we read you. Godspeed and thank you. Mara slumped back against seat cushions, letting her helmet rest on a vibrating headrest. Radiation counters clicked softly in background. The bomber smelled of ozone and overheated wires. She toggled internal comms to open circuit. Wing, sound off. One scorched, not stirred. Rafe said. Crispy but functional. From Jay. Quito coughed. Missing stabilizer fin adds character. Mara laughed until tears pricked eyes, tension venting like coolant from cracked pipes. Set course home. Drinks on command when we hit Trappist Station. As engines wound to cruise, Nix's avatar shimmered on the dash, an abstract orb of shifting fractals. Commander, analysis suggests probability of Mirian retaliation against our colony worlds has now increased by 47% following loss of apex shatter. I know, Mara whispered. But every hour we buy matters. Outside, the universe stretched infinite and silent. But the bomber's ion wake carved a silver thread through darkness-proof that, even in the deepest voids, someone was still lighting a path. She thought about the maze, its treacherous folds now closing over shattered wreckage and drifting clouds of infinity itch. The leeches would keep feasting until nothing recognizable remained, and the nebula would continue to spin its quiet labyrinth, indifferent to war. Mara took one last look at those coordinates before sealing the navlogs. History would forget the purple corridors and the ghostly chrysanthemums blooming there, would never smell burnt cinnamon or hear hulls screaming in implosion. But she and the three voices breathing in her helmet would remember. They had flown inside a nightmare and come out with thousands of lives behind them, a fair trade for scars they now carried in bones and hearts. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythmic hum of recharging capacitors lull adrenaline's edge. Soon, suns would rise on distant worlds. Refugees would step onto safe ground, and unseen Nano Leeches would finish their dark feast far away. In that small interlude of quiet, Mara allowed herself to believe that if you mapped every victory, no matter how hushed, you might one day find the way out of every void, every maze, into light.